But Michael, I'm the managing partner at Eclipse, as Dennis mentioned, and we support highly regulated and data-intensive businesses with their data management, risk, and regulatory transformations. Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie Brown. I work in product management for Source, a data science and software company. I have a background in evaluations and IPV on the sell side. So yeah, we work closely with Michael on some data management methodologies.
Absolutely. So very quickly, a lot of cool sessions to follow today. So some thunder stolen, some things to add as well. So very quickly, a brief history of data management. I'm sure you'll all be shocked to hear that data existed before computers. Data existed before computers, and financial transactions intermediation happened as well before computers. In fact, for all of human history, we've had to create ways to store, retrieve, manipulate, act on, and communicate data. And a fun example that a lot of people haven't seen that I like to share, there's a lot of great examples, but if anyone's ever seen something like this, this is called a tally stick. And a tally stick, basically, we used to over 1,000 years ago, we needed a way to record transactions and manage a ledger. So this was a decentralized ledger back then. We would take a stick, we'd put notches on it to record transactions. When a creditor or lender wanted to do a transaction, they would keep the stock side of the stick, and the borrower would keep the foil side. And so when the borrower needed to come back in to make a payment or update the ledger, they'd bring their stick in, they'd put the two pieces together, they could fit like better than a hand in a glove, and they would update it, and they go on their way. And so that persisted for a very long time, things like that. And then we had computers. So computers transformed a lot. In the 50s, there were gigantic calculators that took up a room. The 60s, generally these databases. 70s, relational databases. 80s and 90s, unstructured data. So preaching to the choir here, and lucky to have people that have actually helped pioneer some of these era transitions in the room here today. But nonetheless, these paradigm shifts have continued. In fact, bewildering to most, it continues to actually accelerate. Our imagination seems to be the only limit. And so this is my version of the paradigm shifts or the eras. So it might be hard to speak for some of you, but data management 1.0, we're talking about the world, particularly in the 80s and 90s, where we start saying, well, we need to bring some form of data management discipline and structure to things. As we moved into the 2.0 paradigm, though, that's where we start having all the frameworks and the taxonomies of data, like DMBOK, like the DCAM model. There was others. Carnegie Mellon had a bunch of really cool pioneering frameworks in the 90s, focused more on the process and engineering side of things. But certainly it's been, we're standing on the shoulders of titans that have helped build what is the data management profession today. A challenge that we've had with data management 2.0, as many people have spoken about throughout the conference today, is that 1.0, 2.0 were never really efficient places to live and operate from a data management standpoint. We were paying tuition, paying some dumb tax maybe. We had a lot of legacy things that we needed to keep up as things continued to grow and evolve. And so it was much more, data management was driven as a stick rather than a carrot. But what's exciting, while we have this big exponential shift happening, is in this data management 3.0 world, we have enablement, transformations. Yes, more modern data tech stacks help to an extent, but the actual progress that we made through 1.0 and 2.0, upskilling the workforce, transforming the processes, changing the DNA of how businesses work, have helped set the stage for us to adopt the 3.0 paradigm. But it's still, I would say, most large enterprises aren't even close on 1.0, 2.0 best practices, so they're not ready for 3.0. They can't even fully adopt or embrace. There is no leapfrogging fully to 3.0. We can maybe pull some things from the playbook ahead, but we still have to go through those motions because that's how we change the way we work. And so I'll talk a lot about that throughout the whole session today. Really passionate about this topic. I'm writing a book right now. It seems to be popular to write books, but the working title is Data Management 3.0, so we talked a lot about this paradigm shift and trying to contribute something meaningful to the space of data management. And so, in short, we went from crawling to walking, trying to run now, and soon we have to figure out how to fly. And put even more simply, some of you, has anyone seen the Lego analogy for data? Same thing kind of applies. And in all the time we had data, and the pile of data just kept growing and growing. So we said, okay, well, we need to sort the data. So we start sorting it. And then data management 2.0, we need to start assembling the data, putting the structure around it. And then in 3.0, we need to start visualizing the data a lot more. And then, dare I say, in 20 years, we'll be back here at DAMA Day 2046, and somebody will be presenting on Data Management 4.0, and we'll be living in Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse. It will be a very different world. Things that we can't even conceive today will be shaping the discussion. But as we also heard today, while this paradigm shift feels bigger and more pronounced than the others, and arguably probably is, we've had near similar magnitude of paradigm shifts throughout the evolution of data management. And what kind of, for me, 3.0 is based off of Web 3 and Industry 3.0, 4.0, and things like that. So this is a common thing where we have these big paradigm shifts when technology makes move. So Charlie, I'd like to get very practical with some specific use cases. Again, focus on banking, the New York audience with the financial services, but some very common challenges it is.
Yeah, so as Michael said, there's kind of generic data management kind of methodologies and best practices. This particular slide talks about those concepts narrowed down to investment banking and trading. And the first three verticals here are what we used to talk to our customers about as the challenges in a trading business, in an investment bank. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but fragmented data infrastructures, regulators increasingly focused on data, less on kind of regulatory reports, but more on how they're produced, and cloud migration. And then suddenly, now we're AI adoption, and AI adoption is everywhere. One of the things that we're noticing is that AI adoption is not just a challenge, it's also part of the solution for the first three. And so it is generating a lot of activity and a lot of discussions with us and with our clients. I'll maybe talk a little bit about a concept here it's a piece of regulation called VCBS 239. This is going to lead into some of the Eclipse methodologies that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But we call this kind of the data journey. So data is created in financial markets, in trading venues. They're actually categorized by a regulation called MiFID II. And they have to flow into finance systems, trading systems, risk systems, and middle office systems. And it's kind of back to this pivot by regulators. Regulators really only wanted to understand before the final numbers. And did you have enough regulatory capital set aside for that? Now they want to understand the journey. They need to see that if there's numbers aggregated on financial reports or risk reports, how did you get there? You have to be able to trace all the way back to source. And you'll see through some of the methodologies Michael's going to talk about, and some of the kind of software applications that our company produces, some interesting use cases for that later on in the slide.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. And certainly a lot of use cases that echo some of the other topics throughout the day. One thing, though, to kind of bring this back down to earth is getting back to first principles, thinking about the basic building blocks of where the root challenge exists. And so another very busy, tiny print slide for you. I'll highlight a couple of things, though. So if you think about a bank's capability model, you have your customers at the top. You need to fulfill provision products and services for those customers. That's why we ultimately exist. And in order to do that, there's a certain number of key business capabilities that have to exist to support it. So on the customer interaction layer, we have everything from marketing to servicing, but across the organization, we have all of our finance, risk data aggregation and reporting requirements that have to exist, as well as managing our internal and external stakeholder expectations. So first principles tells us to get back to the basics and look at what are the fundamental capabilities that we're trying to enable. And that's where we can very quickly say, okay, from a business capability model, I can you can logically probably already picturing it in your head, how do people sit across this, and how do processes interact and get orchestrated across all of this, and it's quite complex. But then I think one of the presenters earlier was talking about technology. So we also need technology enablement, and historically, particularly in data management 1.0, 2.0 paradigms, we see the technology tail being the wagging the dog, so to speak. And so when we lead with technology as a solution, we go in and we look at modern architectures. And I'll say something some people don't like, but at the end of the day, technology architectures, modern, this is just a generic AWS style data lake reference architecture, three-tier medallion type model. Technology architecture hasn't dramatically evolved over the last 30 plus years. At the end of the day, you have source systems at the front, and these source systems weren't built to do massive data flows. And it's not logical or efficient to try and provision them to do so. So we need to move the data somewhere where we can have that happen. And so enter what they call the bronze layer or the first layer. So we need a place to land the raw data that's still true to the source and reliable. But then as we go through across the architecture, I think this is what we'll have probably for many people, but a silver architecture where you start looking at how do we conform, how do we reconcile the data, how do we have the enterprise grade copy of the data, and then how do we then build essentially our data products. I think the speaker spoke about data mesh and how that evolves data products in that gold layer of the architecture. At the end of the day, whatever label you put on it, it's all relatively a consistent approach left to right, but some significant paradigm shifts that ultimately put us in a place where we have a curated zone at the far right where the reports are a consumption zone where the data is the reports are coming out. And so that brings us back to the conflict between the business and the technology, and why it seems like the two realms are kind of constantly colliding with one another. And so that begs the question, why are we all here? What is the solution to this? And you could argue data management was meant to be the solution. So given its DAMA event, we used the DMBOK wheel, and so of the 11 knowledge areas, you think if we drill down into these, there's dozens of capability areas and sub-capabilities within that. I don't care which mousetrap you use, to be honest, all of them have a breakdown of capability areas and sub-capability areas. But how do we bring order to that chaos when there's so many different capabilities that have to be persisted and enabled across an enterprise? No wonder there's fatigue in data management for the spend and the effort that's been going on for years upon years upon years. And so sometimes we've got to take a break and kind of pat ourselves on the back because we have come a long way, but we still have a lot of work left to do. And so that begs the question, is data management actually the solution? And I say that tongue in cheek because I do think actually good data management is the solution, but if people have ever read any of Simon Sinek's work to talk about books, Simon Sinek wrote a book, The Infinite Game, and we always talk about data management as a journey. And so a different mindset in thinking about how you achieve goals, big, hairy, audacious goals, and how you drive transformation, you have to have that infinite mindset. It can't be about, oh, let me run this project and I'm going to achieve the outcome, and then I'm going to be That's when you have snapbacks and you end up not realizing the true value. So how do we try to break down such a complex set of capabilities into things that are more sustainable? And a good example of this, if we look at like SBA data, Small Business Administration data, in the US, well over 90% of small businesses fail. And there's one subset though in the SBA database where their failure rate is orders of magnitude lower. So you might know what that subset is, what type of business has the lowest failure rate in SBA?
Municipalities?
Maybe some.
Restaurants.
I'll give you the answer. It's in franchises. So franchises have astronomically lower failure rate. Anybody want to guess why?
Yeah,
The system. They're super systematized. So they're not relying on tribal knowledge, not relying on heroes to make the system work. And how many times do we feel like we're those heroes, or our small teams are the heroes in the organization, making our piece of the universe work? And so how do we take a page out of the franchise playbook? And so there's more than one arrow in this quiver, and so it's not just data certification. There's a lot on this slide too. You guys will get the slide, so I'm going to talk high level because I think you'll understand the concepts. But the way we look at data certification at Eclipse, and again, different ways to build the mousetrap, but the core concepts are there. We need to start at the foundational basics of defining and governing the data. So when we say defining, what are the approved enterprise-wide business data definitions, and if anyone's been involved in building out like a first business glossary for a large organization, that's a really fun exercise. But then you have to kind of persist and continue down that journey. Getting your owners and stewards identified and empowered, understanding their role, having the authoritative or authorized data sources or golden sources where the data is sourced for consumption. All these things have to be kind of locked in. And we need a way to evergreen this process across all these. On top of that, then we need to understand the provenance of the data. We need to be able to map the image or be able to demonstrate we understand the traceability of the data. Data profiling, how do we ensure that the data is aligned to the business rules for the data? How do we do hygiene checks on, like I like to call it Act A of BCBS 239, principles 3 through 6, accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and adaptability. So how do we ensure that's happening, and how do we proactively identify where the issues exist, which then sets the stage. A lot of times it's somewhat easy to find an inventory of issues, but then we needed to actually be able to remediate them. And so how do we implement and track controls in a meaningful way? Because I think that like a three-legged stool, a lot of organizations, they have finance controls and they have risk controls. They don't really have robust data controls that are organized and centralized. Those controls often are built in the code itself. At least that was true historically, but we're all fighting a good fight to change that. But getting the controls and the data quality issues brought into this systematized, repeatable way of approaching data certification can help us chip away at this. And then, of course, the alerts, ongoing monitoring, and things like that. And then there's actually a sixth component, not really written here on the slide, but overall end-to-end, how do we then certify this workflow so that not only the data is certified, but the workflow that's being followed to implement it, how is that workflow being certified? So if we can get those 6 components correct, I'll go back for a second, we can actually cover the Pareto principle, 80-20. How do we cover 80% of the more impactful aspects of changing the DNA of how our organization works with respect to data and bringing our data under good control, bringing governance into practice? And data certification is a great way. It can be very costly and difficult to change the organization. That's where the fatigue sets in. This is not easy stuff to do. And so the cool thing, as we move from stick era 2.0 to 3.0, we have what Charlie was referring to, the feedback loop with AI enabling a lot of these processes. So I think Kelly said earlier in the very beginning, he said the calculus is changing. I think that's exactly right. We're going to actually be able to use business-driven value propositions to do a lot of this adoption. We'll give real outcomes that can drive our decisions. So getting back to basics again, pulling in another example. Charlie, can I tag you in? Can we talk about NDM for?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll just introduce it. You can see BCBS 239 across the top, but just to give you a little bit of background about BCS 239 and lineage, it is a Basel III regulation. So the Basel III was basically the regulation that came in after the global financial crisis in 2008, very focused on ensuring that banks have enough capital set aside for credit risk, and that's what this slide is about, but also for other risks, market risk and operational risk. They spent a lot of time doing that, and BCBS 239 was like an afterthought. It came out in 2013 and said you also have to focus on where you get your data from. And it was something we pushed at our company for a while, but it seemed to kind of die away around 2014, 15, and it is suddenly on everybody's agenda again. When you're producing numbers on financial reports, on risk reports, on regulatory reports, then you have to show how you produce them. You have to get back to source, you have to show how you did the aggregation. And why is that? So it's great that it's happening, but why is that? I think there's 2 reasons for it. One is AI. And the AI paradigm in itself is this black box concept. You are producing outputs from kind of highly intelligent LLMs and other types of neural networks, and you're not really sure how you produce them. You don't have that kind of focus on what's going on inside. So the BCBS 239 concept and the need to do it has been accelerated by AI. And the second one is regulation itself. The regulators are becoming more tech-focused, they're becoming more data-focused. That the pre-financial crisis idea of data and technology sit over here, and the business sits over there, and they pass the data and the tech over to the business, and then the business just pick up the phone once a month and say, please tell me how I got that data. That's dead. It's data and technology and people, back to Michael's point, it's all merging now. And data people need to understand the business, and the business need to understand how the data is transformed and where the data comes from. So drilling into this, again, back to Michael's kind of methodologies, this is a particular use case here. It is a bank or a set of banks, and what they're trying to do over here is produce credit risk reports, and that's what banks essentially do. They lend to people. And when you lend, you create risk exposures, and those risk exposures need to be managed. And from a data perspective, that ends up being aggregating the credit risks. So kind of group credit risk for different kind of organizations and entities and sectors. And then you have to score that credit risk. So is that a AAA credit risk? Is it a AA? Or whatever your internal kind of credit rating system is. How do you get the data from, depending on the type of bank you are, from retail, corporate, global legal entities, or a trading bank? And these are structured data sources. So you could see earlier, this could just as easily be unstructured. How do you get the data from the left-hand side to those use cases on the right-hand side? It's loaded. You typically validate it, you merge it, you stitch it together, and then you produce your outputs. So that kind of data journey is pretty typical for what happens in the credit risk area in a bank, which is, again, what banks generally do. BCBS 239 has come in now, possibly driven by AI, certainly driven by reg, saying that journey is important, but tracing it, sometimes we refer to this as reverse engineering it. It's reverse engineering how the outputs are produced on these reports, being able to kind of trace through that journey. I think that's
well said, Charlie. And one thing, when Charlie says they've had their data model for a while, we're talking about like 30 years.
Yeah.
That Golden Sources had kind of a leading edge data model. When I was talking about the architecture not really changing, I really meant it. Like, you want to hear the term market share? When the marketing department gets their hands on a modern architecture diagram. And so they spin it as if it's a big paradigm shift in and of itself. We might have a transformation, a change in how we're doing transformations or data cataloging, integrations, but at the end of the day, it's not a massive leap. So
data model, it's built on unique identifiers for core entities. And in a bank that trades, it's the same as any other business that trades. It's what do I trade, who do I trade it with, and how much is it worth? So if you're a car dealer, then you're trading cars, and there are prices of cars and vehicles in the market. That tells you your valuation and will tell you your risk. And then there's who am I trading with, and that's your credit risk kind of element of this. And in a enterprise data management for a bank that trades is no different. What do we trade is typically held in a security master, which gives you the unique identifiers for all of the securities and derivatives and structured products that you trade. What are they worth? That is your price master or your market data solution. And that gives you multi-source kind of versions of the prices of those securities, derivatives, structured products that you trade, and who do I trade with? And that's going to be all of your customers, legal entities, counterparties, and they create the credit risk. So that credit risk slide that we looked at earlier is really kind of a drill into this line on the left-hand side. Michael, I know you've talked about it previously, but this idea of finance systems, risk systems, back office systems, they're really all dealing with the same thing. what do we trade, what are they worth, who do we trade with, but it is different views of the same thing for different purposes. Finance want to know how much money did I make and what's my balance sheet. Risk wants to know how much could I lose if they don't give me back the money. And the back office wants to know who do I pay and when do I pay it. But it is still essentially the same data that flows through the system, and you still need that kind of data governance and data model kind of aspect of things. And those unique identifiers are, the way we look at it at least, they're the bedrock for AI. In 2024, the European regulators, so I'm not sure how much exposure people have here to regulators in Europe, but regulators in Europe are the best in the world at regulating. Not very good at making money, but they're amazing at regulating. And they came out with the 2024 AI Act. And one of the things they did, two things they did in that. The first thing is they kicked off an audit. So every single bank that's somehow regulated by the EU has to have every single piece of AI code identified as part of that audit. And it is something similar to what used to happen with quant type code maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I was involved in some of these kind of audits. They're doing the same thing with AI. The second thing that the European regulator did, and it's obviously happening over here too, but not under a single piece of regulation, is they identified 6 of the most common use cases for AI that banks are putting their kind of AI large language models to work on. All of them require, pretty much all of them, you need to know who the entity counterparty is, who the customer is. One of them is risk orientated, so you need to know the history of the prices, and they're more time series foundation models as opposed to large language models. And they all require data management, those unique identifiers. We look at it in one of two ways. You have the external use cases that require this data, and then you have, well, how can we improve this data management through data agents? And the data agents that we're building are range from support mapping agents, where you map the vendor data into the data model, data quality, reconciliation, which is back to that lineage point, and ID resolution. So a lot of the data over here doesn't have unique identifiers, so you have to use kind of AI methods, fuzzy methods, to uniquely identify some of the core data.
Very well said. We talked a lot about the Basel Accords and the Bank for International Settlements, and so the original Basel I, Basel Accords in 1988 was super indexed on credit risk, because we talked a lot about credit risk. And the prevailing logic is that's what banks do. And then, lo and behold, we still have issues and crises. So they're like, okay, we forgot about market and liquidity risk, let's create Basel II and let's bring that in. And then, lo and behold, we still have crises. So now it's like, oh yeah, operational risk, you gotta add that in. It actually does matter. And so these paradigm shifts, and it seems very obvious in hindsight, but at the time, we can forget how fuzzy the crystal ball maybe looks. So this is our last slide, and we can take questions here as well. But the partnership we have with Golden Source, for example, allows us to create those synergies, like I said, for our clients, where we're bringing in the best of various data management frameworks. Again, I don't care which mousetrap we use, it's all about having a mousetrap, and setting it up. And our big focus is not just doing certification or any of the subcomponents of certification like lineage for the sake of doing it. It's changing fundamentally the DNA of how the organization works. Even in 1.0, 2.0 paradigm, that was the biggest thing. And if we don't get that part right in 3.0, it's going to be out of reach for our organization. So we really have to get good at this DNA change concept. And Charlie, anything on that?
No, I just maybe just finally say that the right-hand side of the diagram there is a taxonomy. It's a software kind of taxonomy generator, ontology generator. It's about 30 years old, and before taxonomies and ontologies became a thing, it was something that our solution was building. So when we started working with Michael and Eclipse, there was a natural synergies there. So Eclipse work on taxonomies, work on structured approaches to analysing data, and the software kind of underpinning that is something that kind of we provide, and some of the kind of the vertical expertise in the risk area. So we've got a strong partnership going, and we're really looking forward to working on more use cases.
Appreciate everyone's time.